Welcome to Democratic Dialogue. This month, I'm your host, Catherine Bayliss. I'm chair of the Gloucester Democratic City Committee, and I'm delighted to have with me today Jonathan Pope, who's a longtime Democrat from Gloucester, also former chairman of the Gloucester School Committee. Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I look forward to it.
So, I'm interested in hearing about whether you grew up as a Democrat, and if you didn't, what made you become a Democrat?
Well, I don't know about growing up. Politics weren't a huge factor in my house as a child, but my parents were Eisenhower Republicans. But that generation of my parents both grew up in the Depression. And, I think they were very independent and very sort of, sort of conservative as far as money went. They always were. I mean, and they still are. Oh, my father's dead, but my mother's is 93, and she's still going strong. It was just the way they were brought up, and so there was an appeal in the Democrats. But it all changed. It all changed with Kennedy and with Nixon, and
So they were for Kennedy.
No, that was actually they weren't, or I don't know. I mean, I was 12. Let's in 1960 I was 12. I probably had different things on my mind, and they were never overtly political. It all changed radically as my brother and I became teenagers, and the Vietnam War was going on, and that's when people really started thinking about their values. I think a lot more than just my grandfather was a Republican or a Democrat, and I think I'll pay a little more attention. There's more at stake now, and in '67, I really, it was part of I got involved in the democratic process and the Democratic Party because of Gene McCarthy. Mm-hmm. I was one of those, frankly, long-haired hippies that came clean for Gene, and went out and worked for him. Although we couldn't vote then. We weren't. You couldn't vote until you were 21 back then. So.
I thought that was true. Yeah.
It was. I think it was 71. I know I didn't get to vote in that election. 68.
Did you join? Were you living in Gloucester then?
I grew up in Gloucester, and I went to Gloucester schools, and with the exception of different, sort of times when I went off and worked for short periods of time in other parts of the country, I've lived in Gloucester my whole life, or when I went to school, I guess. But I always considered myself as a Gloucester resident, even when I wasn't living here.
Well, I know you were a member of the Gloucester Democratic City Committee long before I was. Mm-hmm. Did that start early? Were you young when you did that?
No, I joined the city committee. I was in Washington State, and I'm trying to remember the year. These things. But it was the year that Dukakis got beaten in the primary by Ed King. Mm-hmm. And I was racked with guilt. And that is the only primary or election that I've ever missed voting in. And I joined the city committee, I believe, it must have been the early 80s. It was after I got married and was settled down and actually had more time, I think, or wasn't doing so many different odd things, that I had a more stable life. And I think it was in the early 80s, 82, 83, I joined the city committee. And I was living in Ward 2 at the time and was actually recruited because the Ward 2 was, they didn't have enough people for the convention. I mean, they didn't have enough delegates. And I said, come join the city committee, and because we need delegates to go to the convention. So I jumped in, feet and head first, at the same time. Joined the city committee and then went to the convention, 2 or 3 months later. I'm trying to remember which convention that was, but I believe it was the one in Springfield where there was some problem. Somebody was protesting and picketing, and nobody would cross the picket lines, and it was sort of. And I went out with Mrs. D'Amico at the time, and it was quite an adventure for both of us because we'd never really been involved in anything like that before. So that was a good experience.
So moving up to the present, what do you think of what's happening in Washington?
Well, I think it's great that Obama got elected. I mean, it was just, I think it was just wonderful. I mean, I think it just spoke so highly of this country and all the people in it, and spoke about hope. And after the 8 years before this, it was truly depressing. You'd get up and it was hard to see a positive light at the end of the tunnel, and to turn things around so dramatically and so quickly and so historically all at once was just renewed your faith in this country and where we're going, and I was thrilled. That part of him I'm thrilled, and I think that he's just really courageous in taking on everything that he has, and they all need to be taken on. I mean, this country, unfortunately, people seem to get brought up and told that we're Americans and we're great, and that's it. That's all, the end of story. And there isn't anything that really points to greatness these days unless we achieve it. When I was a kid, when I was going to East Gloucester Elementary School, and there was a real push about science and math, and you were going to school at the same time, and education was truly regarded in high esteem. Your parents, who grew up in the Depression or in World War II, valued education, and the most important thing was that you got a good education. They understood that was the gateway to your success in life. Today, I think people would rather be on Survivor, than have a PhD, or they would hold in esteem somebody who ate worms more than somebody who was able to explain to you, the differences, in quantum mechanics. And that's sad, and that's really, it goes along with another thing that, seems to be happening, and this, a lot of this goes back to Reagan. I mean, it really is. When Reagan got up and said, government is the problem, that government's not the solution, government's the problem. Well, that's just wrong. That's completely wrong. If we didn't have government, it would be anarchy. And what we've just seen is in the financial markets, we did have anarchy. And that's why we are in such trouble today. And the other thing is that, the people, the smart kids today are not going into science or medicine or this and that. They're going into finance because the rewards are obscene. And you can apparently just make money by moving numbers around on a ledger sheet. And anybody with any sense knows that's not real money. That's not real wealth. You've got to create something of value, not just sort of, figure out a way to rob people. And it's just horrifying what has happened in this country. And I really hope that the Democrats stay the course and set things right. And I think that they're trying hard, and I know politics is difficult. I know that everybody that's a Democrat doesn't think exactly the same thing. And everybody that's a Republican doesn't think exactly the same thing. But I think the people of this country have pretty much shown the direction they want to go in. And I hope they are able to do it. To create things like derivatives, which I think are almost inexplicable. I mean, I've had people explain to me what a derivative is, but it's not something that makes any sense. It's essentially, betting against yourself that some company's going to fail, and then taking the proceeds from that bet and selling it to somebody. Something as bizarre as that. So, I'm thrilled with the way things are going.
Well, even in Massachusetts, which has this wonderful Democratic congressional delegation now, more than 50% of the voters have not chosen a party. Mm-hmm. In Gloucester, 59% of the registered voters are unenrolled.
Right.
So they're not Democrats and they're not Republicans. And I think to some extent, the reason is that a lot of people aren't really certain what the fundamental values of each party are. They're confused. And that's why Massachusetts, I think, has voted for Republican governors so often in the past 20 years. People just evaluate the person rather than the network of support they have. So could you talk a little bit about what you think the differences between the two major parties are?
Sure. We'll go back to Reagan, and because I see Reagan as sort of the father of the current Republican Party. I mean, we've suffered through Reagan and the Bushes, and Bill Clinton gave a good effort, but for a lot of that time he had a Republican Congress that sort of prevented him from taking on. Well, he tried to take on some of the big issues, but he was unable to do it. The Republicans basically are telling you that government is bad, and then gone out and tried to prove it with George Bush. And all you have to do is look at who was running FEMA when Katrina hit, and not only did they have the philosophical thing that less government was good, but they also they managed to put incompetence in every possible position that they could, so that it would fail and would look bad, and it did. But that's not what people need. When the hurricane comes, you need competent, a well-run operation coming in and helping you out, and that's why you have government. You have government because there's a common good. There's a commonwealth. Massachusetts is a commonwealth, and there's a common good. Well, the commonwealth is those things that we share. Those things that we as a nation share. The national parks are our possession. Those are the things that the Democrats stand for, is the common good and the commonwealth, and the Republicans stand for the individual wealth. And but once again, one of my favorite things is, I forget which university did the survey, but they did a survey and asked people where they thought they fell in the income brackets, and something like 27% thought they were in the top 10% of the income brackets, and that's that's sort of the lie that the Republicans spread, that you don't want to, you have the opportunity to become, this very, very rich person, and you don't want to pay taxes, and you don't want to, educate everybody, and it's every man for himself, and you should get out there and do it. Whereas Democrats stand for a level playing field. They stand for that shouldn't have your health care taken away because you have a genetic defect.
So you think that health care is a right, or do you think it's a privilege?
I believe that health care is a right. If in an industrialized society, this is the only country that doesn't seem to think that. And it's such a bad system that we have, and there are good parts of it, and it's not about the health care. It's about insurance. When they talk about health care reform, they should be talking about insurance reform. It's not, nobody is talking about a system where the doctors and nurses and hospitals work for the government. They're talking about a system where the doctors and hospitals and nursing homes are paid for by the government, and yet the Republicans are trying to tell you that this will lead to decisions being made about what coverage you'll get. Well, decisions are being made today about what coverage you should get, unless you're one of the 47 million Americans that don't have any coverage at all. And hospitals are struggling, doctors are struggling, insurance companies are getting rich.
Yeah.
And that's what the healthcare, the discussion about healthcare should be. This isn't about creeping socialism or communism or people making it's expanding the coverage that people would have. It's offering people health care when they have a pre-existing condition. I mean, that's what the Democrats are trying to do, and the Republicans are telling you that they'd rather have some guy who's running a profit motive. I mean, he's trying to make money making the decisions, as opposed to the government. Well, my mother is 93. She just had hip replacement, and she has government insurance, as do all people of that age. There was no problem. She got the best care. She's recovering. She's going to be walking on her own. She's walking better and better every day. And there was never a question of there was never any problem. I mean, with who was going to pay for it, or picking the doctor that we wanted, or any of that stuff.
A lot of younger people may not even know that Republicans fought Medicare tooth and nail. They fought Social Security tooth and nail. They fought unemployment insurance tooth and nail. And every time, it's these bogus arguments about ruining competition, socialism.
Yeah. And I don't know how they're able to sell that to the people, that all of these things actually help. That's what is a mystery to me, and it comes back to the thing I said in the beginning: is people say, we're Americans and we're just right, we're just and these are the values that have gotten us there. So therefore, you don't want to tip the cart. Well, people need insurance. They need to have health care. They need access. I mean, one of the, if you stick with if they don't put in a public option, I mean, people may have insurance, but it's going to be insurance with ridiculously high deductibles. Anybody who thinks that this isn't a problem is nuts.
I know, it's funny.
Absolutely nuts.
I find it amusing that the issue of fairness these days in the media has to do with, are we treating the insurance companies fairly so that they can earn monumental profits? Whereas, shouldn't the thing be, is it fair for people to have unequal access to health care?
Right, exactly. It's not only that. There's the cost factor. When I was on the school committee, there were years where we would be talking to the mayor and the city council, the BNF at the city council, and we'd be doing our budget for the next year because the schools always have to do theirs first. We'd say, well, what's the increase in the health care going to be? And they'd say, well, we don't know yet. We think it's going to be this. We're talking to people. But they'd always get into a 2-year contract. And they'd always get the sort of the loss leader in the first year. Well, it's only going to be, and the loss leader would be, oh, it's only going to go up 5 or 6% this year. And then in the second year, there were years that we were hit with 23, 24% increases in healthcare. Well, that would wipe out every penny of increased revenue that we might possibly get, gone, just to pay the health care. So everything else that went up would have to result in a cut, And a lot of those years, we weren't able to give anybody raises. There were years where there were no, the unions had said, well, we know you don't have any money. We'll forego any sort of raise this year, even cost of living, which people were getting, on Social Security they were getting that, but the teachers. So when health care went up and that went up, their paycheck was smaller. They would go to work the next year and their paycheck would be smaller. And that's and people who don't think that the cost of health care needs to be controlled. The United States spends more money on health care than any other nation. They per capita and part of their GNP. But we don't have the best health care. We do for some people. But as any of the sort of the measures that you would measure how a nation is doing as health care, we don't do well. People in other countries live longer and are healthier. So how do you measure, the fact that you can go get, liposuction because you're overweight and have it covered by your insurance because your doctor says, it's important that you lose this weight, whereas somebody else can have hepatitis and can't even get the treated for it. So I mean that's, the common good and the commonwealth is what we're talking about here, and that's what Democrats stand for.
Yeah. My father used to quote Maggie Thatcher, who was one of Ronald Reagan's allies. She once said, "There's no such thing as society. There's only the individual and the family." Right. As though no one helps each other. Right. So there's a moral issue here that I think we should talk about more often as Democrats, because we want the best for the whole population.
Right. Well, that's, and, it starts with health care and education. And those are the things that should be supported and encouraged. And the Democrats try to do that. And, other people, other groups, the Republicans, would very happy just say, oh, well, send us a check and we'll take care of all of that for you. We'll send our kids to wherever we want.
Our kids will go to the best schools and if you weren't smart enough to make a lot of money, you're stuck.
Well, that's one of the huge flaws in the Republican philosophical approach, is that you can pull yourself up by your boot heels. If you just work hard, you can make it. Well, you can't. That isn't necessarily true. Some people do, but the reality is that some people, have something that bad luck. You know, I mean, it can be as simple as that. And some people
Or bad health.
or bad health,
Mm-hmm.
or illness. You know, serious illness. You know, and you know, one of the major ties between personal bankruptcy and it is bad health. People aren't going, you know, bankrupt because they overextend themselves in this and that. They're going bankrupt because they have bad health, lose their job, lose their insurance, can't afford their mortgage. You know, that's why people are filing personal bankruptcy. And it's almost always some health-related issue.
You were talking earlier about the enormous inequities in wealth in this country, and I think most of us, if we're average people, we can't imagine what it would be like to make $20 million a year. And some of those people are generous, many of them, not many, but some people are of that level are Democrats because they think the world should be fairer, but many are not, and they care about what's good for their own bank accounts and investments. So when they talk about tax cuts, you know, we may think, oh, well, we'll save $5, $10 a week on our paychecks. They're thinking maybe $400,000 in cuts. And then where's the money for services that we all enjoy or should be enjoying?
Well, you know, there needs to be equity, and you know, as I was talking about the financial markets, and somehow these truly obscene salaries that people are achieving. It's you know, you could be just as good as at your job as a fisherman or a you know, a mechanic at work fixing the machines at Gorton's. But you'll never, you know, there's no link between you and profits. But so the value of people is not, you know, how much money they have in the bank account. It's whether they're productive and add to society. And that's, you know, one of the things we seem to have lost morally. And once again, you come back to why should we be struggling to figure out how to pay teachers and nurses and people who are helping other people.
Well, that's a good note to wrap up on. Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have more time, but thank you very much for sharing your experience and passion and all your own work for the common good.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot.